Hello and welcome. I'm Becky with Malvern Books. We're very happy to be with you this evening for another installment of the Austin Community College Creative Writing Department's Literary Coffeehouse and Open Mic. Our host this evening is Ursula Pike, who teaches creative writing at ACC, and their featured writer is Crisosto Apache. Ursula Pike is the author of An Indian Among Los Indígenas, a native travel memoir from Heyday Books. Ursula lives in Austin, Texas, and teaches creative writing for the Austin Community College. She has an MFA in creative nonfiction from the Institute of American Indian Arts and is a member of the Karuk tribe. Ursula, please take it away.
Thank you so much, Becky. I'm so excited to be able to host today. And Malvern Books is such a wonderful partner for the literary community in general, but also ACC's creative writing department specifically. So I am super excited today to be able to introduce our featured reader, Crisosto Apache. So he'll read some, and then later we'll have an open mic, and I'll give instructions then. So Crisosto Apache is originally from Mescalero, New Mexico, on the Mescalero Apache Reservation, and currently lives in the Denver metro area in Colorado with their spouse. They are Mescalero Apache, Chiricahua Apache, and Diné of the Salt clan born for the Towering House clan, and is assistant professor of English at the Rocky Mountain College of Art and Design. They hold an MFA from the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Crisosto's debut collection is Genesis from Lost Alphabet. Crisosto's second forthcoming collection is Ghostword, out by Gnashing Teeth Publication, mid-2022. Some of the poems in this collection have appeared in the Rumpus, Loch Raven Review, Poetry Foundation's Poetry Magazine, ANMLY Magazine, Digging Through the Fat, and McGraw Hill Publishing. I would like to everybody to please welcome Crisosto Apache.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you again for inviting me. Thank you, the Austin Community College, Malvern Books, and everybody who was able to join us tonight. So yes, I'm really excited because a lot of things are happening this year, and one of the things that I'm really looking forward to is the publication of my second book, Ghostword, which I'll read some of those parts of those poems later tonight. But I'm going to start off with my first book called Genesis Redacted. It might be backwards, but anyhow, this book, the first book of mine, was kind of an interesting process to go through. The collection itself is highly experimental. I really wanted to play with the page of each page, so I played a lot with the spacing. There's also an emphasis on Native American history. I wrote a poem in here that was dedicated to the 38 Dakota that were hung in Mankato, Minnesota. So I wrote a poem about that, sort of a list poem. And there's some treaty work that I've also wrote that's part of this collection as well. So yes, this book basically started with a conversation with my mother. I used to like having conversations with my mother because she had a lot of stories that she told me, mostly about our family and also about our history. She also taught me a lot about my Mescalero language, and also she spoke Diné, so she taught me a little bit about speaking Diné, which is an incorporation of this book. I sort of play along with both languages. But the book initially started out with a conversation between me and my mother about the time she was carrying me during the 9 months in utero. I always thought that would be a very interesting kind of conversation because I don't know if we have an opportunity to have that conversation with our mothers as to where they traveled, what they were doing, what was happening at that sort of time. So kind of to go back to that idea, and really that's the thread of the book, was the 9 months during this period that my mother was carrying me. And she spent a majority of that time on my father's reservation, called Tohajale, which is about maybe 20 miles west of Albuquerque. The name Tohajale means where the water originates. Like there's a place on the reservation that's a spring or a well where people used to go and get spring water. But yes, my mother spent a good time of a good portion of that time on my father's reservation with my father's mother. And during the wintertime, there was my father's mother did a lot of her weaving. So they spent a lot of time indoors, and my mom was there to help as they stayed in this small hogan on the reservation. So I'm going to read a few of the thread of mine. 1971. January says, the sheerest white lingers still. Cumulative stars gather against a verdant eastern sky. Her precarious frame rattles the entrance. Her womb leans alongside faint fire. A sedentary whelm of kerosene lanterns sinks. Fibers against her dense, rapid border begins to interweave. She emits woven laden cradle songs. Central fire sings of extinct salt, collapsing toward towering houses. Within the week of January, the quadrantid meteor shower grazes the Earth's atmosphere. Residue from the meteor afterglow laminates the constellation Botus. Meanwhile, a lunar expedition concludes the month with an undetected nuclear test. The song ceases. January 1st, 1971 to January 31st, 1971. During that time that I wrote the initial thread for this book, I went back through like a timeline of history of what was occurring around the world. And what I found was that there was a lot of nuclear testing and a lot of lunar launches. So the thread has a combination of that coinciding with the poems that I wrote alongside. This next one is number 3, 1971. February says, the sheerest white is still upon the ground. She sits beneath a hunkering woolen veil. She nods against the corner pillow cases replete with flaccid flore harvests from the previous summer. Anonymously, she sits fulcrum, carding wool, small extrication of white fiber. She fuses wads between the metal bristle boards, raking coarsely back and forth. With each resonant crackle, a universe expands. February, the moon will become full and luminate like dense snow as voyages reach their destination, to knock a golf ball into the dark side of the moon. When the short voyage concludes, they return to Earth, where nuclear weapons are now barred. February 1st, 1971 to February 28th, 1971. Number 4, 1971. March says, his coldest breath will travel further. She whirls the water and raises the hue, taking salvage on her web. She intercourses, gathering flint and turquoise, transforming into eminent celestial strands, connecting her cosmological star presence tapestry, giving birth to her one whirling star, Nubis. March equinox separates day and night equally. The scales balance except for the 2-day underground nuclear testing events. They hoard their own light. March 1st, 1971 to March 31st, 1971. So this one's the last poem of the book, and it's also the last thread. Once again, a full moon positions itself between the earth and sun, absorbing all the glory of his rays, emulating. Satellite launches for the first time into Earth's orbit, and one lunar capsule plunges into the sea. Life emerges. Gul'i, my birth, August 1st, 1971 to August 7th, 1971. Emergent emanation, like birth, like a cosset lamb, he is placed inside a shoebox, a constitution of place towards cradleboard, toward kwa, hoan, home, towards ndebikeya, Diné, homelands, towards Ndebizat, Diné, language, life acquisition of identity toward X. Opium to mescal gatherers, burnt wood gatherers, sheep harvesters. After salt is extinct, towering houses topple, a return to origin, beginning, center fire, home, whirling. The next August says, everything ripens. Number 9, 1971, Adajindi. So that last phrase, Adajindi, is a phrase that Apache people used to signify the very beginning of the universe. It was something that is always said time immemorial. I'm going to read one last poem from this collection. And this one is called Synapse. There are a few poems that kind of snuck themselves into this collection that were dream poems, and this happens to be one of them. This one is called Synapse. In case lining weighs against your skin, sweltering, not swelling, not moving beyond taction or that saddling abode of breath, which pushes against a gild embroider or sarcophagus, maybe a chrysalis. Cufflinks secure a phonic breath in crisscrossing singed hands. Another absence of your breath, no exclamations to butterfly wings, no trembling to hummingbirds. Your moon-written word, your sun phases form. Water delineates from swirling vacuum of air and whispering gasps. Your eyes widen on eaves, awake from last night. Water ripples from fountain drops. Iron wrench turns in a clockwise creak. Sighs decease and decompress. Counterclockwise increase your aspirate surge. Droplets cushion and form quickened moss, ever thickening at the base. A black glistening liquid undulates with slow currents, splaying glissades of ebbs by plummeting onto your chest cavity. Every breath hastens its impact, a cacophony of murmurs, soft kisses on your desiccant forehead, forsaking within a last glottal frill, never leaving your sneer, a cadaver smiling gaze. The night before, a labyrinth of crude bathroom stalls lining up each cough or edifice, eminent in echo of moans and dispels, a small voice among lit lamp flickers. Night after night, these recurrences do not fade against the brown rust slippage of liquid language. Sitting at the edge of your lips, verdigris procures a sludge of blatant memory, sacred to turquoise at dusk. That same dusk, your body is left in a margin of cornfield and merging roadway. Your head faces south, tilting just enough to see the reoccurrence, disappear in a gleam of red taillights. You again, again, and again, until the next morning, as the sun swells with pink linings, it bereaves the sound of doves taking flight, hushing the shrills of sitting thrush. All right, so The poems that I just read are from my first collection called Genesis Redacted. I think you can find them at the bookstore there at Malvern. So I can read a few poems, because I think that's about the time that I have, from my new collection called Ghostword. This collection took a very long time for me to complete. It really started a number of years ago. My first interaction with the modernist writer, Akutagawa Ryunosuke, was introduced to me by Arthur Z., who was a teacher of mine back when I first entered the Institution of American Indian Arts. Fell in love with this writer. His work was really difficult to come across because a lot of his books were out of print. The writer lived around the 1920s. The book that I used as a sort of a prompt was his last book he wrote called A Fool's Life. In that book, he has 53 entries, which I tried to sort of have a loose conversations with, but using my own experiences coming from the Mescalero Apache Reservation and just some of the background information that comes from that. So I've written the book in 3 parts. The first time I tried to try to respond to all 53 within 3 hours, and I failed. I only got through half of them. So that was considered the first part. The second part of the book was the second attempt, the 3 hours, and I was able to complete my responses to the rest. And then the third part is really dedicated to the rest of his other work, the short stories that he had written, which I really have fallen in love with. So again, these poems are written that correspond with each entry. So they're numbered according to which of the entries that I respond to. So this first one is called 33 Protagonist. Quote, upon the icy summit, not even the shadow of a condor to be seen, unquote. Our Akutagawa number 33 hero. Negoistan esh, painted woman, Nayanaskani, kill for earth, Tubajis Diné, born in water, Hastin, man, first man. First man gazes long toward the mountaintop, with no possibility of speaking up to them. Twisted among the snow-capped peak, a woman covered in white paste hangs alongside her 2 sons. One son stained with the blood of the earth, the other son dripping of thunderstorms. Some days, man rushes up the mountainside, never reaching the top. Other days, he never emerges. But the moon still rises in cycle for ceremony, and the rain still falls in cycle for ceremony. The sun still shines in cycles for ceremony. Our life still begins in cycles for ceremony. Death still proceeds in cycles for ceremony. Lest they forgive, and despite the efforts of first men, he tries not to forget the cycle of ceremony. The second one I'm going to read is called number 19, Light. Quote, unfolding these man-made wings, easily he glided up into the sky, unquote. Our Akutagawa, number 19, man-made wings. Eagle volunteers to carry all my prayers to the sun as an equal to a father, a deity, or God. On his ascent, he undergoes the dense force of sun rays. Eagle returns to earth with singed wings. In his reoccurring ascension, Eagle finds himself looking into the sun. Eagle places his right wing over his eyes, blocking the sun's rays. Although sun warms his feathers, Eagle can never find himself inside the rays of its illumination and never carrying my undeserving prayers upward. This next one I'm going to read is called number 12, Crisosto. And Crisosto is a place on my reservation, close to where I grew up. It's a place where a few of my relatives lived. So this one is called number 12, Crisosto, for my uncle, E. de Kluge. Quote, the submarine inside was dim, unquote. Arakadegawa, number 12, Naval Base. In my youth, I hitched a ride to San Diego, across chirping desert and distant night. I grazed upon a slow-moving dark encasing a complex cerulean cavity. Each night I stood beneath the sky for hours, mesmerized at the perplexed reformatory of twinkling lights and broken glass fragments spreading against the glistening sunset. A faceless man behind a lost reflection of glass at a drive-up window informs me, too bad you know nothing of your past. How far will I walk against the night, confirming to the captivity I'd never realized? Some years under the kitchen table, they all huddle as the rampage continues toward the back of the house. A clash of debris crashing from the other room recoils, and broken sounds escape the barricade of doors. All I remember is returning in 1970. All they remember is me sitting at the edge of my bed with the war still in my hands. Okay. I think I might have time for a couple more.
Yes, please do.
Okay. This one is called number 34, Conquered. Quote, that 7 or 8 years ago, he hadn't understood color. He realized now, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 34, Color. As I permanently expect, I unscrew the caps of each paint tube. I squeeze the first paint tube, releasing a bit of white titanium color. I then open the second paint tube and squeeze the second color. I scoop a small bit of scarlet red that seeps in the unsettled palette. I render the two colors together, and in time, I add a bit more titanium. White creating an alterated red. Each time I mix in more white, and it dilutes the red even more. And each time I blend in more white, I lose a greater part of myself. So this next one is number 10, Teachers. Quote, in the autumn sunlight, the oak stirring not a slightest twig's leaf, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 10, Mentor. Hauling around these leginous crates containing copies of authors' signed books, old manuscripts, and scraps of paper, along with my own rejected scriptures that reveal the extensions of exerted tree branches and connections to frail bridges over land masses, and the remaining voices of contained bodies of water. The stationery mentions semantic connections inside each sheet of Latin pulp, concealing all my belongings I thought would make me a better writer. I can only remember the one tree and its branches overreaching, underneath each limb, shadowing the letters, consonants, and vowels of where I am. Awake and still thumbing through each page, trying to figure out how I will carry each copy. And each word inside those pages, the breeze gently courses. I remain unwavered, unmoved, and dreaming. This next one is number 8, Fireworks. Quote, these violent blossoms of fire, these awesome fireworks in the sky, to hold them, he would give his life, unquote. R. Akutagawa, number 8, Sparks. An ignition of colorful sparks blooms as I begin the long night dance into dawn. Scruples of tiny embers are released, and from the surge palms I grip the yucca. Sword now used to shield and consecrate my movements. The spark ascends, forming the decadent bouquets, separating form from the deepening indigo that collides with the stars. At the edge of all widening ebbs that I am pulled towards, the inevitable black sky, hearing the hiss of twinkling ghosts, long since burnt. Upon midnight, the intermittent crackling bursts and releases, a superficial haze as the distant detonations encumbers, the somber deadness of my concrete existence in a display of dissolute coloration. The light surges and hides a type of meaning. I tuck away from my relatives into the celebration meant only for those unlike me, a celebration recognizing the awful American 4th of July. All right, I think that might be all I have time for, right?
I think we have time if you did want to. Well, how about I ask you some questions, and then if you feel inspired to read anything else, that would be great.
Okay.
And thank you so much. That was so powerful, and I really loved the explanation, the origin story of Genesis Redacted. It deepens my understanding of those poems. I find it so interesting that you, it's almost like you set up structures, or you set up situations for yourself where you have specific times or certain poems that you're going to respond to. I also noticed last month for Poetry Month, you listed 31 different poets that had inspired you. And I just wanted to ask you, is that something that you find helpful in your writing process, is to have kind of a structure to within to do your creativity, to be creative?
I'm always inspired by other poets, and actually other writers as well. I try to keep up on my writing because the writing of other people really inspires me. For some reason, I'm also drawn to a lot of Japanese and Chinese writing, most of like the early work, only because I think I'm in love with the imagery. The imagery, I think, drives a lot of that poetry. And so for me, I'm always going back and trying to find like old writings because I find them interesting. But yes, I think poetry, in terms of the way it's structured, really feed a lot of the ways that my writing method. Everything really has to have a structure to it in order to experience that journey of the story. And in this case, the second book, I think, has a story in of itself, aside from the writer that I was inspired by. The story behind that writer was a tragic one. He ended up committing suicide, and he wrote this last manuscript as he was dying. Just what I always find curious, that the last moments of your life, you're sitting there trying to describe what life meant. What is it in your life that you want to sort of leave as a last will and testament, sort of? But yeah, so I carried this this carbon copy that was given to us by my instructor when I was at the Institute of American Indian Arts back in the early 90s. And I carried that copy for a very long time and was always reading it. I was reading these short 53 entries. And for some reason, a lot of his writing just really lingered with me. After I found a copy of his book, when I looked on the internet, I was pretty elated. So I ended up burning that carbon copy because it had so much connection that I didn't want those words to sort of linger after they sort of spent their time doing what was necessary for me to grow. And now I have the book on my shelf that I just keep referring back to.
That's great. That's great. And that reminds me, that makes me think about like wondering what about your writing process. Like, do you start with an image or an idea? Because there's so many vivid images in your writing, the stars in the sky, those paint tubes, the sun swelling. So, and I know it's different for different poems, but which do you tend to be most motivated to sit down and write?
I like writing about the vastness of looking up at the sky, because there's such a huge connection to every single one of us, no matter where we are on the planet. And I sort of think I take a lot of my ideas from that perspective. And then I try to zoom in on specific instances where, you know, people might be experiencing that moment. Like if we're looking at the sun, there may be a lot of us looking at that same sun, which I find is an interesting, kind of perspective. As far as my imagery, I mean, I'm really open to just like internalizing or going back into myself and sort of putting myself in that place, kind of thinking of the very minute details of what I might experience. And sometimes it's really hard to do that, because I find myself being more distracted in my day-to-day life, that I really need to have, sort of the space and the time allotted to doing that. Another part of that also is I'm always having a work in progress. I'm like always working on something as I'm going through. So I'll write a poem and it fits into one of the collections that I'm currently working on as I'm trying to finish one of the collections. So I'm always thinking about something to write about. That sounds kind of a crazy notion. But
No, that's great. And if that's what motivates you, I mean, that's wonderful. And so you told me earlier that you're working on a third manuscript right now, even as you're just about to release your second manuscript, Ghostword.
Right.
How is that working on something new? Does that distract you, or?
For me, it's always what I'm afraid of is I'm gonna wake up one day and not have anything to write about. That's always been a fear of mine. So I have like all these different projects going about. My third manuscript that I'm currently working on is called Isness, and it's loosely based on the avant-garde idea of poems or even art that's just existing in the moment, like going from poem to poem and just sort of existing in that moment and being a poem, just being a poem, as opposed to trying to look at it or to describe it or defining it. They're just like moments of being is how I kind of think about it.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. I wanted to ask, do you write in any other genre besides poetry? I know sometimes there's, I see the blog posts on your website, and I think those are really interesting to read.
There's writings that have written that are more informational, but right now I'm trying to challenge myself to do a little narrative writing, kind of going back to my own life and pulling out moments and trying to work on a memoir, if you call it that. But it's really just going back to very specific moments of my life where I'm trying to moments of rediscovery or moments of redefining. And I think for me, that's really challenging, because anytime that I sit down to write, it's always my poetic mind that's always thinking. I never really slow myself down enough to kind of explore the various moments I think narrative writing deserves.
Right. I understand that. Well, that's exciting. I would be very interested in reading that. And I wanted to ask you, I know you're super busy, but is there something that you're reading or that you would recommend folks check out in addition to your own work?
Oh, geez.
I'm sorry to have caught you off guard with that. Yeah. I know there's so much that's coming out. It's like an avalanche.
Let's see. I recently read and interviewed a poet named Yan Yi. The book is Dreams of the Divided Field. Very beautiful work. It's one I really love. I really love like getting into it and being able to have a conversation with the writer. Just looking at my bookshelf up here. One I know that I go back to quite a bit is Pura Lopez Colome. She wrote a book called Watchword. I think another one called No Shelter. They were both translated by Forrest Gander. A couple of years, Forrest Gander won the Pulitzer Prize for poetry with his book Be With. That's one book I go back to. She's such an amazing poet. Her use of language and using writers to sort of influence her is something that I really value a lot of the writing that I read. I always look for writers that are influenced by others or inspired by other people's writing. Let's see, what else am I reading? Oh, Forrest Gander's Be With is one that I really love.
Yeah, no, thank you. Those are
like
awesome.
So many.
What I
Like
know.
you said on my blog spot, I incorporate all the poems that I listed on social media on my website, so you can go in and like read them.
Oh, great. Yes, I saw links to many amazing poets and poems.
Yeah.
And so your book is coming out later this year. If people wanted to kind of find out when you'll be reading again or other events that you might have, what's the best way to be aware of what you're doing?
So follow me on social media, Instagram. I'm more active on Instagram and Twitter. On my author page on Facebook, I'll post events there. I've been trying to be more dedicated to my website and updating that as I go along. The last several years I've been like totally busy, so I've slowly been uploading new information to my website of like upcoming events, links to follow. We recently did a Colorado Voices segment on Rocky Mountain PBS that aired a couple of weeks ago.
Oh, great. Oh, great. And the link, yeah, I think I saw that. That's on your website. That's wonderful.
Yes. So,
well, that's great. I wanted to say, if you wanted to share one more poem before we go to the open mic, if you had something, that would be a wonderful way to close out this segment.
Okay. I'll read a poem from my new manuscript to kind of just close this out. This poem was published in an anthology out in Australia. I was really glad to be part of that anthology. But this poem is called A Prayer for Us. Our song is sung to the eastern mountain. Our refrain remains inside a newborn. In spring, chirping flickers push the quiet song, and we belong among the morning air. Our song is sung toward the eastern mountain. Our youth in playful poise levels the afternoon and heightens the yellow grasses. Our children build the frame of arbors holding the trees together. Our song is sung to the western mountain. Our drumbeat demands the consent of elders to reflect the knowledge and whole better ways of life that carves the strength in our voices. Our song is sung to the northern mountains. Our cries echo through looming slow fog and waking valleys spreading ash on frozen ground to muffle the somber sighs and heavy sounds.
Oh,
That's the
beautiful.
That's the opening poem for my third manuscript.
Oh, that's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming and reading. I really enjoyed this. It was great to see you. And everyone, please visit Malvern Books if you're interested in finding Crisosto's books, either Genesis or the new one, Ghostword, that's coming out. And yeah, just thank you very much for joining our little group here.
This is awesome. Thank you again for the invite. Thank you, Austin Community College and Malvern Books and everybody who was able to be